episode is going to be full of good, bad, and terrible jokes. So, a man walked into a lawyer's office and asked him how much he charged. The lawyer responded, "It's $100 for 3 questions." "Isn't that a lot?" said the man. "Yes," responded the lawyer. "And what's your 3rd question?" I'm Paula Williams, an aviation marketing consultant with ABCI, and you're watching or listening to Contrails and Cocktails. Of course, whenever you get 2 smart aviation people together in a room, the stories are going to start flying. And when you start mixing cocktails, things start to get really fun. So we wanted to create that experience of being in a airport bar in a podcast. So our guest this week is attorney and comedian John Morse. The Morse Law Group was founded by Jonathan S. Morse in January 2006. All work is personally performed or supervised by Mr. Morse, using contract attorneys only where necessary and appropriate. Mr. Morse lives in Westlake Village with his wife, Leanne, who is a citizen of the United States, Canada, and Switzerland, and speaks fluent French. They have 4 children, all of whom are fluent in French. Mr. Morse is active in Rotary and is the past president of the Westlake Village Sunrise Rotary Club. So Contrails and Cocktails is sponsored by the Global Aircraft Group. The Global Aircraft Group offers desktop appraisals, expert witness, pre-buy inspections. The founder is located in New England, and he travels free of charge to anyone in New England with a situation that needs his services. You may need an aircraft appraisal for an aircraft transaction, an estate settlement, a divorce, a legal situation. Whatever it is, if you've got a problem involving aircraft values, Mark can solve it. Mark Perry is the president and founder of Global Aircraft Group. Mark has over 30 years of experience in corporate aviation. He has a diverse roster of clients. He has unparalleled access to professional resources, which helps the organization achieve positive returns on his clients' investments and capital. Prior to establishing Global Aircraft Group, Mark worked for Bombardier in numerous capacities involving sales, maintenance, completion, pre-purchase inspections. He is also employed by the Lockheed Advanced Development Programs, which are better known as the Skunk Works, under Kelly Johnson. Mark holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Massachusetts in management. He is also a senior certified aircraft appraiser and member of the Professional Aircraft Appraiser organization. And he is a licensed airframe and power plant mechanic. Mark also attended the Massachusetts School of Law in Andover. So this is going to be a fun podcast. I'm the only one in the room that has not been to law school, but I think I'm the only one that is still mostly sane. So anyway, we had a great time talking with Mark and John, and I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Let's jump into the episode.
Sure.
Okay.
Welcome. I'll just introduce myself. I'm an attorney in California. I specialize in aviation.
That works.
And my tagline is, if the machine has wings, I can do the transaction. And if it has 1 wing, I can do the lawsuit.
That's brilliant. Well, I'm Paula Williams with ABCI. We help aviation companies sell more of their products and services. And that was not nearly as funny as yours. I'm going to have to think of how to add humor to that. So that was good.
Well, I can tell you that I get so fed up with these networking where people ask to give their elevator pitch and they think they're going to the top of the Empire State Building.
Right?
And I just found people remember that.
Yeah. 1 sentence is great, or even 2, but, we don't need a 20-story elevator pitch.
Well, the truth is I stopped listening after about 15 seconds.
Yeah. That's a good number.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mark, how about you?
I'll try to keep this down to a minute.
Okay.
It's Mark Perry, Global Aircraft Consultant Group, and a master appraiser with the Organization of Flying Adjusters, a senior appraiser, Professional Aircraft Organization, do expert witness, pre-buy inspections, and that's it.
Cool. That was about 15 seconds. That was pretty good.
Everyone's still awake.
Everyone's still awake. That's great. Well, I'm really happy that you guys could join us for this week's episode, and I'm really happy, especially John, you're our guest this week, and it's really always a pleasure to have someone on that is actually funny and an attorney that's actually funny. What are the chances?
Well, I found that humor can be useful to diffuse a very tense situation at times.
Yeah.
I was doing a deposition of a plaintiff's expert, and the lawyer on the other side absolutely hated my boss. I mean, hated him with a passion. And during the deposition, he was making really nasty comments about my boss on the record.
Oh.
And I was trying to ignore him and do my job. And then he started making indirect snide comments. And I finally stopped and I said, "Pardon me, was that comment directed at me?" He said, "No, it was directed at your mentor." And I said, "But my wife knows nothing about this case."
That's
sort of diffused attention, and we were fine after that.
Yeah. It's amazing how it can sometimes just really diffuse a situation, especially with insurance and legal situations where everybody is just on the edge of their seat,
Well, but on the other hand, I've had to learn to suppress my preppy sarcasm at times.
Oh, yeah.
I was in a deposition back east with a Philadelphia lawyer, and he was being really pushy and aggressive, and I was trying to bite my tongue and say nothing. And then finally, I objected to one of his questions, and he said, "I don't understand your objection." And I said, "I'm not surprised." And I had to apologize to him during the break. I said, "You left yourself so wide open, I just couldn't resist."
You left the door open. I just walked through.
You got it.
That's fantastic. And I'm sure that serves you really well in those kinds of situations.
Well, as my wife would say, as long as I don't get too snippy and sarcastic, yes.
Right. Exactly. That is funny. And, all of us have had the experience of where, the humor just gets the best of us in a situation where we're supposed to be being serious. And it just gets worse and worse and worse because it's funny that it's funny in the middle of a place that you're not supposed to be laughing. It's like laughing in church and you just can't stop.
Well, I've learned that the safe thing is to make fun of me, not to make fun of the other person, though.
Right. Yeah, that's always a good option. So, Mark, do you know any good aviation jokes?
Yeah, I have some really bad aviation warm-up jokes for John.
Okay.
I'm gonna warm it up with some really bad. But anyway, when's the only time that you have too much fuel on your aircraft?
After you've crashed.
When you're on fire.
Yeah.
Whether or not you crashed.
That joke crashed.
Yeah,
it did. On fire all the way down.
Yep. Let's try another one.
There's three old deaf pilots that got together for coffee, and first pilot says, "Man, is it windy?" And the second pilot said, "No, it's Thursday." Third pilot says, "Me too. Let's go get a drink."
That was terrible.
All right, well, it gets worse. Why was the little airplane sent to the hangar?
Because he's been bad?
That he had a bad altitude.
Bad altitude. Very good.
And should I keep going or stop? Or better? I can go all night.
Should we move on?
All right. Who built the worst airplane that couldn't fly?
No idea.
The Wrong Brothers.
Who?
The Wrong Brothers.
The Wrong Brothers. Okay, the Wrong Brothers. Got it.
All right.
I almost didn't because that was really bad.
Well, what do aircraft mechanics say they like the most about their jobs?
They get to swear at everybody? I don't know.
Yeah, well, no, most of them say that they find it very riveting.
Riveting.
Okay.
Okay.
That's all right. That should be a good bad joke warm up for John.
Moving right along.
Well, as I told you, I don't really tell jokes. I just tell stories. Sometimes they're funnier than any jokes you can come up with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, after I graduated from college, flying was my passion. I actually owned 2 airplanes. And my mother asked me if I'd marry an ugly girl if she owned an airplane. And I said, what kind of airplane?
You didn't ask how ugly. You asked what kind of airplane.
Full disclosure, my wife is very attractive. She did not own an airplane, but I did teach her to fly, and she became a very good pilot.
Excellent. Yeah, John and I fly as well. So that's a wonderful thing to fly together.
After working 3.5 years as an engineer, I went over the wall and I became a flight instructor and a charter pilot. And I really loved doing that. But then my mother was very happy when I decided to get a real job and grow up, and I went to law school.
Oh my goodness.
So I did that, doing that for 45 years. That's become my career. And of course, after I graduated, I thought, well, wow, now I'm a professional. Now I have status. And about 20 years ago, I was visiting one of my insurance clients up in Seattle. And the claims manager introduced me to the underwriters. He said, John is our janitor. He cleans up our messes in California.
That's true. Not the best way to explain what you do, but I guess it is accurate.
John?
What's that?
Where'd you go to law school?
I started at St. Louis University. In fact, first year I was flying freight at night, going to school in the daytime. And I thought that was great fun. But after that, I took a year off and flew for a company in Milwaukee. And then I transferred to Michigan. That's where I got my degree.
Mm.
Okay.
And
Mark, you've been to law school as well, haven't you?
I went 1 year at Mass School of Law.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been a great career. Of course, people have asked me what I do. And of course, my pet peeve is that people take 5 minutes to say what they could more effectively say in 2 minutes, or 2 minutes to say what they could more effectively say in 1 minute. In fact, one time I was in a networking group. Yeah, right? I was in a networking group where everybody was going on and on with their elevator pitch. And it came to me and they asked me about mine. I said, well, somebody asked me to describe myself in 25 words or less. And I said, concise. And I sat down.
That's good.
I like that one.
Yeah.
But I actually did develop what I believe is an effective elevator pitch, because most people stop listening after about 15 seconds.
Yeah.
So my pitch is, I'm an attorney and I specialize in aviation transactions and lawsuits. If the machine has wings, I can do the transaction. And if it has one wing, I can do the lawsuit.
That's appropriate. Right. Yeah, we did this in one of our marketing groups. We had a round table full of people having breakfast, and we tried to do introductions, elevator pitches in 15 seconds. And these are people who are in aviation. And it was harder than you'd think. We're going around the room and everybody wants to go last, and they're like, I'm not ready. I don't, and a lot of stumbling and fumbling, even among sales professionals, to try and do a 15-second elevator pitch. So it's harder than it sounds, but very important.
It is. It took me a couple of years to come up with that.
That's good. That's a really good one. Cool.
Shorten mine up.
Yeah. Well, I'm still working on mine. I've never stopped working on mine. But now I know I need to make it funny to keep up with John. So we'll do our best.
Yeah. Definitely.
Cool. So John, you had some stories you wanted to share.
I did. Most people ask me, well, you do airplane crashes. And of course, I never expect to be in an airplane crash. So what can you tell me that I can use in my life?
Yeah.
That's people always say, what about me? People say, I say people listen to WIIFM 24/7. That's what's in it for me.
Right.
And looking back, I started looking at the accidents, the mistakes people make. And what I discovered is that the same mistakes that cause people to crash airplanes are the same mistakes that cause people to crash and burn in their personal and professional lives. And in aviation, we say that the purpose of investigating airplane accidents is to find the cause so we can find a way to prevent the accidents. And what I've discovered, if people can see the mistakes that cause airplane accidents and apply it to their personal lives, they can avoid a lot of heartbreak, a lot of tragedy in their own lives. And I've actually put together a presentation which I've shared with several Rotary clubs and other groups. And I get a lot of good feedback that, yeah, some of these things really do make sense when you think about it.
We'd love to see it.
Okay, well, let me share my screen with you and see if we can make that happen. Can you see my screen now?
Nope. And don't stress about time or anything else. I mean, we'll just cut this little bit out and go straight into it, and it'll look really smooth. So,
okay, well, let me see if I can figure out how to get back to share screen.
Yeah, it should be a green button at the bottom of your Zoom dashboard. So under our heads.
How's that?
Not yet.
There you go.
Oh, there we go. Yep, it just took a second to get there.
Okay, let me see if I can now.
There's a menu item at the top called slideshow. There we go. Yeah.
Can you see it now?
There might be a little bit of a lag. I'm seeing the slides, but I'm also seeing the navigator on the left-hand side.
Oh.
So maybe from beginning, if you hit the upper left-hand corner where it says from beginning and start slideshow.
There we go.
There we go. Perfect.
Can we go back? Okay, there we go. Okay, we're sharing now?
Yes. So we can start from here.
All right. Okay, so as I indicated, there are a lot of life lessons I've learned from these airplane accidents. I'd like to share some of them and demonstrate some of the ways that I found that people can apply them in their own lives, ways that I found apply them in my life. This is one of the lessons I've learned is that if you keep making the same small mistake, eventually it will bite you. This is a case that I actually investigated. It was a lawsuit I defended. It was a Cessna 320, just like this. It's a simple twin-engine airplane. It was owned by a Navy fighter pilot who used this airplane to travel back and forth to pick up his daughters for weekend visitations.
Mm-hmm.
On
I bet they love that.
Oh, they did.
Mm-hmm.
They did. But on this particular day, he flew from Fallon, Nevada over to Fresno, California to pick up his daughters. After he landed at Fresno, he picked up full load of fuel. You got a left fuel tank and a right fuel tank in the wingtips. He had full fuel to start with. And they took off, flew back to Fallon, Nevada. And while he was in the landing pattern, ready to land with his gear down, both engines quit. And instead of putting into a glide, he lost control, stalled, crashed, burned, and killed everybody.
Oh.
And after the accident, we found out that the fuel selector was set for cross feed. They were feeding both engines off the left tank. So he ran the left tank dry, and that caused both engines to quit at the same time. He had a full right tank.
Oh, my goodness.
Now, the question is, how could this possibly have happened? This was a very experienced military pilot, but he made a very simple mistake and he followed through. Now, in this airplane is a very simple fuel system. you set it up where the left engine feeds from the left tank, the right engine feeds from the right tank. You never have to think about it.
Right.
But you have the capability to draw fuel from one tank to feed both of them. It's almost never used. In thousands of hours of flying multi-engine airplanes, I've done that twice, and that was on check rides to demonstrate I knew how. So there was absolutely no reason for him to be on cross feed. In fact, going back to his flight, he had to have been on cross feed for the whole flight to run it dry. So we know that during startup, the checklist says make sure that you have each tank on the main feeding the correct engine. So he missed that item on the checklist. And the pre-takeoff checklist says make sure you have the fuel on the proper tanks. He missed that item. So he took off again in cross feed. And as he was flying to Nevada, he was burning more and more fuel out of the left tank. It would be a very, very heavy right wing getting heavier and heavier. He would have had to trim that out. So that's another clue that something was wrong. Then he got into the landing pattern. You have a pre-landing checklist that says put your gear down, put your flaps down, make sure your fuel selector's in the right place. He missed that one.
Yeah, the gums check.
Several times.
Yeah.
Before it actually bit him. If he had caught it any one of those times, he would have had a normal landing and nothing would have happened. So that's what happened here. But I've discovered that the same thing can happen in our personal lives. An accident investigator I worked with thought he had a good marriage until one day he came home, he found out that his wife left, cleaned out her bank accounts on the way out of town. He didn't have a clue anything was wrong. And I think that's because he simply wasn't paying attention. I'm sure there were a lot of clues that she was unhappy, but it culminated in a disaster when she cleaned him out. And I look back in my life, and I remember that when we were married 45 years ago, our maid of honor said that in a marriage, the little things are the big things. And we forget that sometimes. If we take care of the little things, the big things can take care of themselves. And if we don't pay attention to the little things, they can come back to bite us in ways we could never imagine.
Right. No kidding. That was a big thing.
This is another interesting incident. I heard about this one when I was an engineering student back 1965. This accident happened in summer of 1965, and it actually had a happy ending. It was a Pan Am 707 that took off from San Francisco, headed for Hawaii. And when they were about 800 feet up, the number 4 engine, the outboard engine on the right wing, had an uncontained turbine failure. And it cut into the fuel tank, actually burned off 25 feet of wing like a blowtorch.
Oof.
We know what happened because it was a passenger in the right side of the airplane with a movie camera, filmed the whole thing. It just worked its way backward. Now, the pilots up front didn't know what was going on exactly, but he knew something was wrong. And it was something he wasn't used to because now he had a yaw to the right, but he also needed almost full right aileron to stop the roll because he was missing 25 feet of wing. Now, the normal procedure when you lose an engine is to slow down to the best rate of climb speed. He did not do that. He stayed at his proper speed, and that's the only thing that kept it from rolling over. So he knew something was wrong, but he knew he was still flying, so he didn't change anything, and he managed to get it back on the ground. In fact, he was so calm, he told the passengers, folks, we're having a minor problem. We're going to have to take it back and land, and nobody panicked.
Wow.
Afterward, Boeing said that if he had slowed down to the best rate of climb as he was trained to do, he would have crashed. So the lesson there is if you don't have to do anything right away, do nothing until you think it through. When I was a young lawyer, I got a really nasty letter from opposing counsel. And I sat down and I dictated an equally nasty letter. But then when I saw it in print, I decided, wait a minute, I'm just going to throw this in the drawer and forget about it overnight. Then I'll look at it in the morning. And it was the best thing I could have done, because it just would have started a war if I'd sent that letter out.
Oh, brilliant.
Didn't have to do anything. I had a chance to think about it.
Yeah. That's
And
the hardest thing to do, though, to wait.
It is a hard thing to do sometimes. Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
But I tell my clients, when you're tempted to send out a nasty email, read it again.
Mm-hmm.
Before you push the send button, ask yourself whether you're willing to see this on the front page of the LA Times or blown up poster size in front of a jury.
Yeah.
Because quite often we don't have to do anything right away. And it's always a good idea to think it through. Read it again. Make sure you're sending it to the right people. If you get a really nasty letter from your opponent, make sure you're forwarding it to your client and not responding to your opponent with what you really don't want him to see.
Right.
But
there have been some high-profile cases of that, where someone replied all to situations and gave people way too much information. And
it happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
We call it Murphy's Law.
Mm-hmm.
Something can go wrong, it will at the worst possible time. Wow. So again, stop and think about it before you do it. That's the lesson I've learned here. Another lesson I've learned is that sometimes you have to break the rules. It's one thing to follow the rules. It's another thing to follow them blindly to the point where it can cause a real serious problem. This was a Swiss Air flight in 1998. They took off from New York, headed for Geneva on a rather routine flight, an MD-11. They were in the air cruising along in Canadian airspace, and they had a fire in the cabin. Cabin was getting more and more smoke filled. And the captain decided he had to divert. Initially, he was going to go back to Boston. Then he decided that Halifax was closer. He was only about 43 miles from Halifax. But instead of putting it on the ground, he sat up at 15,000 feet dumping fuel. Because in an MD-11, the maximum takeoff weight is substantially higher than the maximum landing weight.
Yeah.
And the idea is that you're going to burn off your fuel, be at the maximum landing weight by the time you get there. But if something happens en route, you have to dump fuel to get down to your maximum landing weight. Now, in this case, he should have put it on the ground, worry about the landing weight later. Maybe you'll overstress the landing gear. Maybe you'll have a little longer landing roll, but at least you'll be on the ground safely. But while he was sitting up there dumping fuel, the smoke got heavier and heavier, eventually incapacitated, and they crashed and killed everybody.
Oh, my goodness.
But we say, my wife is Swiss, and we say that the Swiss are very, very rule-bound people. The common joke is that in Switzerland, everything is required or forbidden. And it normally works well, but it didn't on this case. But I remember several years ago, in 1979, during Jimmy Carter's day, you may remember we had an oil crisis. Everybody thought we were going to be running out of oil. We had to save oil. And the federal government mandated during the summer that in order to save energy, all government buildings had to be kept at a temperature of 77 degrees or higher. The idea was that you limit the use of air conditioning. The trouble was that in Alaska, they had to turn the heat on in order to comply with that mandate.
Oh, no. Wow.
And so eventually they figured it out rather quickly and they gave them an exemption. But this is a perfect example of sometimes you have to break the rules.
Yeah.
And in our Rotary Club, we were dealing with a charter school in Watts. They're preparing students for college. Many of them were coming from homes where they'd be the first to graduate from high school. The principal had very strict rules, including dress codes. And one of the rules was no gang colors. He was very, very strict about that. And one day a student showed up wearing sneakers with gang colors. And he came unglued. He called the student into his office, told him what's going on and you need to change. It turned out this is the only pair of sneakers the kid had. And so he made an exception. He broke the rule on that because there was a reason to.
Yeah.
So again, if you have to follow the rules, follow them, but sometimes you have to break them. You have to know which is which.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I've learned is don't get distracted by trifles. Stay alert. This was an Eastern Airlines flight that took off from New York in a December day headed for Miami. The flight was normal all the way through, except when they got down to Miami, they put the landing gear down. They didn't get the 3 green lights. You're supposed to have 1 green light, 1 for 2 main gear, 1 for the nose gear.
Right.
Nose gear light didn't come on. And so the captain thought, well, maybe I have a serious problem. He put it into a holding pattern over the Everglades. And they sent the flight engineer down into the lower compartment to see if he could see the landing gear. And while he was down there, for some reason, the autopilot kicked off and the plane entered into a very, very shallow, very gentle spiral and landed in the Everglades and killed half the people on it, according to the pilot. Well, it turned out the problem was not in the landing gear. The landing gear was down, but the 50-cent indicator light was burned out.
Oh, yeah. I remember this story. This was horrible.
Yeah.
Oh.
But the perfect example of how they got distracted by a trifle.
Mm-hmm.
And while they were getting distracted by that, bad things happened.
Yeah.
And I read that something like 90% of the accidents in automobiles happen because the driver is distracted.
Mm-hmm.
And if we pay attention to what we're doing and not get distracted, we can save a lot of lives.
Yeah.
When I was driving on the New York State Thruway, there were signs all along saying, if you get caught using your cell phone 3 times, they take your license away.
Yeah.
But there have been so many cases where people are texting while they're driving, or even just answering the phone while they're driving.
I know. And you think, well, that other people get distracted. I'll be just fine, because I'm smarter than everybody else. That's not
right.
true. Yeah.
And the truth is, most of the time we get away with it.
Yeah.
It's the one time we're least expected is when it can bite us.
Right, right.
This is one that was rather personal for me. Sometimes you have to say no. And if you're a pilot, sometimes you have to say, hey, the weather is too bad, I ain't going.
Yeah.
In fact, an insurance adjuster told me we make the big bucks for knowing when and when not to fly. This was I remember it vividly. It was July 28, 1973. I was a charter pilot based in St. Louis. I was assigned to fly from St. Louis to South Bend, Indiana, to pick up a load of freight and bring it back to St. Louis. And I knew there was a line of thunderstorms coming in from the west. And I knew if I didn't get out ahead of them, I wasn't going to get out because they were so strong and they were so long, there was no way I could even fly around them. And while I was getting ready for takeoff, I could actually see them coming in.
Mm.
I managed to get airborne, got turned around, and those thunderstorms were still beating me up, even though they were more than 10 miles away. It was some of the most severe turbulence I can remember.
Mm.
And about the time it got calm, it got really quiet on the departure control frequency because an Ozark F-27 just like that crashed trying to go through it on approach.
Mm.
Ozark Airlines' first fatal accident.
Mm.
And of course, it didn't affect me. I kept going, got my load of freight, turned around. When I got back to Champaign, Illinois, I saw the storms coming in. So I was going to land and have a nice, easy dinner waiting for those storms to go overhead. And while I was there were several Ozark Airlines crews waiting on the ground because nobody was trying to go through that storm.
Yeah.
Well, I had a very pleasant dinner. The storm went overhead. I had a very nice, clean airplane. I flew back to St. Louis without touching a cloud.
Fantastic.
So what could this pilot have done? This pilot should have refused to try to go through there. He could have turned around and gone to another airport, wait for them to go through. Instead, he tried to push through, and it was a really bad situation. Now, I've had cases where employees refuse to do something illegal and get fired for it.
Mm-hmm.
I had one who was a escrow agent working for a title insurance company, and she got a home loan in for closing. All the documents were signed by the borrower, but the dates were missing on the 3-day right of cancellation. And she called the loan officer and told her about it. The loan officer said, well, just fill in the dates and close the loan anyway. And she said, no, I can't do that. That would be illegal.
Right.
And the supervisor called her and again told her to do it. She said, just go ahead and appease the client. And she refused, and they laid her off.
Yeah.
But she collected from them on that, because you cannot fire somebody for refusing to do something illegal.
Yeah.
Had she done something illegal, they would have turned around and come after her for doing something illegal.
Yeah.
So there are times when you just have to say no. And you have to decide what's the better thing to do. If you're asked to do something illegal, most of the time you're probably better off not to do it and to document what you did and why.
Right. Illegal, immoral, or fattening, I guess, is the
Yeah. Well,
right.
Fattening, you can probably
fattening, we'll say yes.
Exactly.
But illegal or immoral, yeah, absolutely. You have to draw the line for yourself, because your boss is not going to be on the hook for that and doesn't have to live with your decision.
Well, the fact is, the boss quite often will throw you under the bus.
Yeah.
We always say that people are like tea bags. You find out what they're made of when you put them in hot water.
Yeah.
Okay, this is another one that says, check your insurance policies. You'd be amazed how many times I've dealt with accidents that simply don't have any insurance coverage. We had one where a doctor that owned his own airplane. He was flying at night from Bakersfield, where he had a satellite office, back to his home base at Santa Barbara. And it was a cloudy night. He really wasn't supposed to be in the clouds, but he was. But he was managed to save the airplane. But he cleared the ridge line by minus 20 feet and killed himself and everybody aboard. Well, it turned out his insurance policy said he didn't have any coverage unless he had 30 hours of flight time in that type of airplane, which he didn't have. And didn't cover carrying passengers unless he had 100 hours of flight time in that airplane. So he had paid for his insurance, but the insurance provided no coverage simply because he didn't check his policy and follow it. But outside of aviation, it's amazing how many people don't check their auto policies. Do you really have enough coverage for what you're doing? Long before the do not call list, I used to get cold calls from Farmers Insurance Company. And in those days, no matter what your policy limit was, if you were driving somebody else's car, the liability limits dropped down to the statutory minimum of $15,000 per person, $30,000 per accident.
Oof. Yeah.
And so this young kid tried to pitch me on Farmers Insurance. I said, I would never buy Farmers Insurance. He said, why? And I told him that. And he said, well, what's the problem with that?
Right.
But not just your auto policy, but do you have enough coverage for your homeowner? Yeah. And if you have a $100,000 policy, it's probably not enough if you have serious assets. But you can buy what's called an umbrella policy for $1 million or $2 million worth of coverage. Yeah. So you're covered. At that point, you're much less likely to have your assets at risk. Right. The other thing people forget about is, what about uninsured motorist coverage? There are a lot of people out on the road that don't have coverage that cause severe damage. If you have uninsured motorist coverage, your policy will cover you as if they are the insurance company for the other driver. Yeah. And so you might want to think about that.
Right.
And life insurance. I had a client not too long ago. Her husband was flying and he crashed and killed himself. He was a Navy veteran. They had a pretty nice retirement pension for him. Unfortunately, that pension died when he died, and she was left with nothing. And she didn't have a life insurance policy to take care of her. So,
wow.
Once again, think about it. What insurance do you have, and is it enough? The other thing I've learned is that accidents happen quickly and unexpectedly. Be prepared.
Yeah.
The common denominator in most of the airplane accidents I've handled are that normal, healthy, happy people get into an airplane. They have no idea they're going to be dead within an hour before they get out of the airplane. But that can happen in cars too. The fact is, there are a lot more people that die in car accidents than die in airplane accidents.
Yep.
And it can happen very quickly. But if it does happen, do you have the life insurance you need? How's your estate set up? If you died, would your wife know the passwords for your bank accounts? Would she be a signator on your bank accounts? What assets would she have to live on? When you go to sell the house, how is it titled? I tell people, put your assets into a living trust, then she becomes the trustee. You don't have to go through probate.
Smart.
That's a whole nother seminar.
We'll have to do another podcast on that.
Yeah, but it's amazing how these things can come back and bite you when you don't think at the worst possible time. In fact, when I was a young lawyer, I was told that the most valuable lawyer in the office is the one that has his files in such an order that if he got run over by a truck, somebody could sit down at his desk and pick up the ball and not miss a beat.
Yeah.
But one of my consultants who became my client was a brilliant chemist, and he created a co-catalyst for making aviation fuel. By using this co-catalyst, the companies could put this into their tanks. They would create much more throughput with much less sulfuric acid. It was a huge moneymaker for them. And my client made millions selling this by the truckload. And he was the only one that knew how to make it. People had tried to reverse engineer, but they couldn't quite do it because he had the last little bit of knowledge of how he tweaked it. He never even told me how he did it. He just hinted at it. But then his family convinced him to retire and turn over the business to the oldest son. And of course, the oldest son ran the business off the tracks and into the ground.
Oh, no.
And sued his father when his father tried to take the business back.
Oh, no.
And he tried to force his father to turn over the formula. Well, Daddy burned the only copy of the formula, so it was all in Daddy's head. We finally got the kid off his back, and we tried to convince Dad to give the formula to somebody. Give it to your alma mater, your secretary, somebody you trust. And we almost had him persuaded to do that. Then he had a heart attack, took the formula to his grave with him.
Oh. That's horrible.
It is, but these are the things that happen. And they happen at the worst possible time. And the best thing we can do is be prepared. If we're not here, what are we leaving behind? Because in the end, the only thing we leave behind is the memories of the people that knew us. And what are they going to remember from us if we left them a mess to clean up?
Yeah.
Those are the lessons I've learned, or some of them.
That's fantastic. Those are really, really great lessons. And I think we can relate to all of them in a lot of ways besides aviation. So that's something else.
Well, that's the point I was making, is that what we learn in aviation can be applied elsewhere as well.
Yeah, that is for sure. Great. Did let's I know, Mark, you had a cocktail that you wanted to share. Of course, this being Contrails and Cocktails. We always have to end with a drink.
Yeah, well, I did want to say a couple things.
Yeah.
I wanted to thank John. It was truly an honor to have him as a guest on Contrails and Cocktails, and deeply appreciate that. And then also, maybe when you have time, I heard John's presentation at the Organization of Flying Adjusters in Daytona 2 years ago on wills and estate and the importance of having trust. So after that talk, I was able to get that done last year, based strictly on John's discussion on that presentation, which I think actually we should do it again because that's so beneficial, in my opinion. So anyway, and then I was reminded of one of those accidents. I was following one the other day, and it was everyone survived, but I think it was a 757, and they were landing in Morocco. It was about 120 degrees, and they ran out. They overshot the runway, and the proximity switches, just barely touched. They didn't realize they had touched the runway. And so the proximity warning went, did its job and put the throttles in auto lock.
Oh, no.
But at the same time, because of the heat, they ran out of runway, and they did everything right, but except they missed that the throttle. The first thing I should have was the throttles, I guess. And so once they realized that the throttles were locked, it was only like 6 seconds to get the engine spooled up, but because they were so close to the ground, it pancaked in. But there's a new term because these aircraft are so automated. And I was thinking, why do they even need that auto lock, really? Where they just do everything for you. And they call it confirmation bias. So yeah, which is an interesting term. So anyway, John's.
That reminds me. There's a story that the newest Airbus has a new cockpit. It's a pilot and a dog. And the pilot's job is to feed the dog, and the dog's job is to bite the pilot if he tries to touch anything.
It's safer if he just keeps his hands to himself.
Yeah, very automated.
But over 50 years ago, the L-1011 could land in 0-0 visibility. It do it better than the pilots could. So the automation's been around for a long time. It's just getting more and more sophisticated now that we have more and more computing power.
Right.
Yeah.
We just feel better when we have control.
Yes, we do.
When I switched over on Challengers, when they went from analog to digital, during all the maintenance testing, I always knew where to look, during all of our operational testing and whatever we were doing. It was pretty extensive stuff, and I had checked my own checklist and et cetera. And then when I went to analog, just even a simple gear swing, all you're getting is just a couple of little flickers of light, that tell you the gear's up or down. Yeah. But prior to that, we would check the hydraulic pressures. There's a bunch of stuff I would watch just doing a simple landing gear check. That today's pilots or mechanics, they don't have access to that to be able to look at it and see.
Right.
So.
I'm fascinated that these young kids today don't have the same skill sets we had. For instance, with a slide rule, we had to figure out where the decimal point is.
Mm-hmm.
43 times 57. I know it's about 60 times 40. I know it's about 2,400. I know it's not 24,000 or 240. But if these kids missed a decimal point on a calculator, they'd never spot it.
Right. But they can plug a phone into one of these really expensive cars and figure out what's wrong with it, from the codes and other fabulous computer things that are going on in the car's brains, that we don't even access.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's a whole different mindset, and I think it requires everybody. You really need to. I feel better when an MRO has old and very young mechanics because then they cover the gamut of stuff that's coming out now, stuff that is from that the old guys have learned from experience. You just can't beat that.
Well, a lot of the new pilots, I think, are more computer operators. They don't have the same stick and rudder skills we grew up with.
Right.
And I think if you took the electrons away from some of these young pilots, they couldn't find their way home.
Right. So you need an old pilot and a young co-pilot, or vice versa, and then you're covered both ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The pilots in that story I just told, it was 30. The captain was 37 years old with 8,000 hours. Mm-hmm. And the co-pilot was 32-ish with 3,000 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, but they missed the basic, hit the throttles forward.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
On a go around.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Just, it happens.
Yep.
But the comforting thing is I found is that it's extremely rare that an accident happens because of a single mistake.
That's true.
It's almost always a chain of events. And if you break one link in the chain, you prevent the accident.
Yep. My husband's always saying that, even with our finances and everything else, we want to be 3 mistakes high.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
One incident we handled, I counted 10 links in the chain, any one of which could have broken it.
Mm.
Yep, especially in aviation.
Yep.
There's so many checks and balances in place.
Yeah.
So, are you guys ready for a cocktail and mocktail?
Hopefully a less risky maneuver to make a cocktail.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, this cocktail, and you're talking about the small things, and I was talking with Donna. I was running my jokes by Donna today, and then also we're working on a proper cocktail that we would want to present. And anyway, she named this one, and it's called the Soft Landing.
Thank you, Donna. That's a good name.
Yeah, I thought it would fit for this podcast. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty simple. It's made with, is that enough for people to see it?
We can see your bar, which is lovely. Pimm's. Okay.
Okay, it's called Pimm's. I've never had it. It's a gin-based liqueur. Goes back to England in the 1840s as a medicine. It was started out as strictly a medicine. Then it grew in popularity, and now this beverage is. If you go to England, I guess it's called. You can order a Pimm's, or if you go to Wimbledon.
Yeah.
Wimbledon. That's their equivalent of the Kentucky Derby
julep.
We did
right.
3 or 4 podcasts ago. So it's kind of ties in with that, I guess. But it's very simple. It's 2 parts of Pimm's to 1 part of fresh squeezed lemon with ginger ale, and a little bit of sugar, simple syrup to taste. And you can garnish it with mint or fruit, strawberry, lemon, whatever makes you happy. Today I'm doing orange.
Okay. How much ginger ale?
It's equal parts.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 3-1, and then you add ginger ale with ice. And really to taste.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And we'll publish the recipe, of course. So.
Yeah, and what I almost did using
Speaking of risk,
I had some confirmation bias.
Okay.
I put the ginger ale in and started to shake it.
Oh. That would be a fun pour.
Yeah, so you don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, there's the soft landings and the Mr. Pims.
Here, here. Chin chin.
Cheers.
Does it taste good?
Yeah. For the orange slice. Yeah, it's I think it's like one of the better ones that we've done so far.
Really?
To do a separate podcast where we just have a podcast where we talk about our favorite cocktail and see if people want to chime in and see which one they like the best.
Smart. Yeah, that's a good idea.
All the pot out of each one that we've done.
Right. Well, we've done some really cool ones. I'm not personally a fan of gin. Does it taste like Christmas trees, or is it? Do the other ingredients kind of mellow that out some?
No, it's hard to describe because I've never had it before.
Yeah.
It has a little bit of I don't even know. Different. It's really refreshing.
Yeah.
I don't really put up a lot of alcohol.
Yeah.
It's not too sweet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very light and refreshing. Oh, and it's also very been adopted in New Orleans. This is by that. So it's, if you go to New Orleans, I guess it's a popular drink down there. More of a summertime drink.
Sounds much better than a hurricane, which has kind of been the traditional New Orleans tourist drink.
Yeah, and again, this is a nice pre-dinner cocktail, in my opinion, because it's
okay.
It's not too. I'm not a big drinker anyway, but we'll have an occasional old fashioned or something like that. If I'm going out for a steak dinner, special occasion, or a wedding or something like that. But this is very nice, very refreshing. It's not too much alcohol. And then you can mocktail. Actually, this would taste very good. I would leave the alcohol out.
Yeah.
The mocktail, and I would replace it with tea, sweet tea.
Sweet tea. Okay.
And I think it would be really good as a mocktail also.
Yeah, or even unsweet tea if you want to go on the dry end. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Well, I have to tell you, my daughter-in-law is following this because she does weddings, and so a lot of people that do weddings have a signature cocktail for their wedding. And
this would be a good one.
It's getting some good ideas from you.
Yeah, it has some really interesting history, and Yep. And it's refreshing. I think it would be perfect for a wedding.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. I think I've really enjoyed hearing all about risk management and everything. I'm inspired to go set up a trust and things like that, and to make a soft landing.